Okay.
In five, four, three, two.
May 10th remains etched in the memory of many Bahamians. 1980, when the Flamingo was bombed. Where were you and your feelings at that time and today?
Okay, so I remember it very clearly, and I've reprised this many times because, of course, since that time, Keyshawn Monroe has done that exhibition about the sinking of Flamingo. So I've been had an opportunity to go over what happened during those days. So I was a student at Harvard University at the Kennedy School. The incident happened, I believe, late on Saturday evening, the 10th of May. So on Sunday evening, I'm sitting watching the evening news. As you know, we were all captive to the three services of the U.S. at that time. So NBC News comes on. There's a woman named Jessica Savage, who was the anchor. And the lead story is that Cuban MiGs had sunk a Bahamian vessel, HMBS Flamingo. So I thought, my God. So I called George Smith, who was a minister of the government, my friend at the time. I said, what's going on? And he says, oh, we're going to be at war by evening. So I said, oh boy. So anyway, Prime Minister Pinling was in London. He was about to present the awards for the Templeton Prize. And he got on the Concorde straight away. Arthur Hanna was the acting prime minister. He got on the Concorde, flew over to New York. Dame Marguerite completed the ceremony in London, and he came back home to Nassau. Now, one of the problems, and I've been involved in public relations for the Bahamas government for a long time, is that the rumor mill started to go. The Cubans were invading. There was going to be problems because the cabinet did not actually make an announcement about this until late on the Sunday evening. And finally, the news was announced that the two boats had been intercepted on the high seas. They had been sunk. 4 persons were missing, and there was a landing on Duncantown, Ragged Island. So this is quite explosive. The Defense Force was 6 weeks old at the time, and the country was just 7 years old. We had diplomatic relations with Cuba, but no embassy, no exchange of ambassadors, and really had no relationship with them. So one of the things that had to happen was that we had to find an intermediary, and that intermediary country was Jamaica. Dudley Thompson, Senator Dudley Thompson, a friend of who used to work in Lyndon Pinling's law firm, was then the foreign minister of Jamaica, and they made the contacts with the Cubans to get the thing sorted out. I was called home by Sir Lyndon because there was going to be an international press conference to help organize the statement and to help organize the press conference, which I did. I got leave. Mike Dukakis, who eventually ran for president of the United States, was one of my lecturers, and he gave me permission to leave the class for the few days to come back to Nassau to deal with the issue, which I did, and then went back to Boston, and that's how I recall it. And as I said, I've had several times to go over the history of this, and a couple of lessons which I will say to our own party members on the anniversary itself is, one is it shows you the value of international relationships, and that is if you have a neighbor, even though you may not like that neighbor, you try to have good relations with them and talk. You need to have channels of communications, and that's why when I became foreign minister, I was able to open the embassy in Cuba, and we now have a situation where there's an exchange of ambassadors, and we have regular contacts. And the Cubans were able to pay compensation. They apologized for what had happened. It was an error, a mistake. Of course, the Defense Force was new. They thought that these were pirates on the high seas. So a lot of mistakes were made by them. And the other thing I should say is that when I made an official visit to Havana with Perry Christie when he was prime minister, I heard Raul Castro, who was then the president of Cuba, apologize to Mr. Christie again, saying, look, I was a Defense Force minister at the time. When I understood what happened, I was really, really sorry that we had made a serious mistake, and we tried to make amends as soon as possible, and he apologized again to the Prime Minister.
Do you feel the compensation was adequate?
Well, you can only make a judgment at the time. I think it was $100,000 per person. I don't know what that translates into. It's for four men, and plus the boat. So I assume at the time there was a benchmark by which these things are settled internationally. And I don't know what that translates by present value into today's money, but I'm assuming that the lawyers acted correctly.
Today's relationship with Cuba can be described as?
Excellent. There's no issue. We are in touch every day. We cooperate on all kinds of measures, whether on migration, medical care, labor, you name it. So there's no issue at all with us.
Yet we still have migrants from Cuba ending up in Bahamian waters.
Not lately. There's an issue. The United States, we told the United States that part of the reason that drives unlawful migration or irregular migration from Cuba has to do with the restrictions which they place on the issuance of visas for Cubans to go there, and the blockade which they have in place on the Cuban economy, and that's driving the migration. The route through the Bahamas is not utilized anymore. Largely, we don't seem to have much of a problem. The problem is really from the south, from Haiti. So no, we don't have that issue. But where there is an issue, we turn them around within 72 hours, and they're settled back in their country, their home country.
A lot of Bahamians are now going to Cuba.
Tourism, education, healthcare, those are the big issues, and buying cigars, of course, and rum.
And sadly, some end up in jail.
Yes,
Today, can you update us?
Yeah, I think I can't give you the exact numbers, but somewhere around 20 people are in jail, largely for running drugs. And many of the families in the Bahamas are quite exercised about the long sentences which their people have gotten. Many of them have gotten sentences 19 years or more. And they keep thinking that the Bahamas government can get them out of prison because the complaint is that the conditions are quite harsh. The latest request that we made was turned down. They said that they have decided to make a very, very strict ruling with regard to people who violate their drug laws, and that everybody has to serve their sentence. So that's where we are. But as Bahamians petition for their family members, of course, the foreign ministry responds as best we can.
The exchange, the availability of Cuban health services being available, that's grown for Bahamians.
Well, we have a number of Cuban teachers in our school system, and they do things like teaching Spanish. They also are things like auto mechanics, carpentry, those kinds of skills. And many of them serve in the islands outside New Providence, but also in New Providence schools. Nurses, doctors, that too. At one point, they were helping with autism support. That's a serious thing too. So, yeah, we have a whole range of relationships. The U.S. unfortunately takes a jaundiced eye of this, and they keep in one of their human rights reports, they're talking about this being, suggesting that this may be trafficking in persons. It's not. It's a straight out deal. These people get paid for what they do, and they work well, and they get along well in the society.
I see so much more Bahamians going to Cuba for eye operations and the likes.
Yeah, there's a program for cataract removals largely and glaucoma suspects, and that works well. It's a free program. You register at a local clinic here, you get on a list, and that's largely because the public system here is unable to cope with the thousands of people who have that issue because of glaucoma and cataracts. They're largely the two major areas. And there's a lot of diabetes and hypertension in the country, and that leads to some of these conditions. Yeah.
What would you tell Bahamians who might be interested in those services?
Well, they should. In New Providence, I think you register at the South Beach Clinic and you get on a list. In the Family Islands, you register the clinics in the Family Islands and you get on a list. And they'll call you. The government picks up the tab to get you there and for the time you're there. And then you return home and the follow-up care. And it's worked out pretty well. It doesn't look like there are too many complaints about it.
Okay, good. So, going forward, what about exchanges and opportunities for education in Cuba? What would you tell prospective students?
There used to be a very well utilized scholarship program, particularly for medical students. But one of the issues which arises is that once you qualify as a doctor in Cuba, you don't automatically, like the UWI students, qualify to practice medicine in the Bahamas. So what has to happen is after you get through the Cuban system, you either have to pass the U.S. boards or there's an exam which is set by the the Medical Council of the Caribbean, CARICOM. And once you pass those, then you can go on to qualify here in the Bahamas. But certainly the opportunities are there for education. And what I'd really like is whether, some people, because we need a lot of Spanish speakers, and I wish people would, I'm really sorry myself that I didn't pay attention to Spanish as a language when I was in high school, but because there's a real need. We live in a Spanish hemisphere largely, and it would be good to have more Spanish speakers in the country.
Give us your response, turning to another topic, your response to the Grand Bahama Port Authority. First, the Prime Minister's address to the Chamber of Commerce there.
Well, the Prime Minister's address was on point, simple, direct, straightforward, laid out the history of what has happened and why we are where we are. The fact is the Grand Bahamas economy has been going in the wrong direction. The Bahamas government has been subsidizing that economy when the Hawksbill Creek Agreement granted certain responsibilities to the Grand Bahama Port Authority, and those responsibilities include investment in the city and promoting the city, and they've been failing in those objectives and those responsibilities. So the Prime Minister has said that you need to find the new shareholders because these shareholders either are unwilling or unable to fund what is necessary in the city. In his speech, he said it looks like they've just become the collector of license fees and service charges, and that's not what was envisaged. There'll be the investments that they are now claiming credit for, they can take no credit for because those are largely investments attracted by the Bahamas government. And were it not for the subsidies of the Bahamas government, there would be deep problems and serious issues in Grand Bahama today. So that can't continue, although we do and will continue as long as we have the responsibility. But those who have in law, by contract, the responsibility to promote and invest in the city should do so and should step up to the plate. And if they can't, then they need to move on. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to drum up support in the public now. This chorus of, oh, you shouldn't be doing this to us and all the rest of it. But all of that is rubbish. This is a straight-out legal issue. There's a provision in the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. It says that the government is to be reimbursed for services over and above certain things that you subtract. And a bill has been sent to them. The bill is $357 million. The question is, are you going to pay or not going to pay? The Obeah man sang a song, said, pay me what you owe me. I've come to collect. And that's where we are.
And in terms of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, latest response is that they will have a live town meeting to respond to the Prime Minister's address. Your take?
Well, it's unfortunate. The Prime Minister was invited by the business community not to engage in any public dialogue with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. He was invited by the Grand Bahama Chamber of Commerce to come and say, what is the government's position on this matter? Now, these people now seem to want to get into a public fight and spat tit for tat over this. I wish them good luck. In 1969, Prime Minister Lyndon Pindling went to open Borco, And he said at that event that if the unbending social order in Freeport did not change or bend, it would be broken. And that resulted in the Bahamianization of Freeport and a glorious age with new investors. Edward St. George and Jack Haywood took over the company. Albert Miller was their executing agent, and developed the city to a point where during the Pinling era you can really call it a kind of magic city. I mean, it grew, it expanded, it was Bahamianized. Edward St. George died, and then a fight ensues between the two families, Haywood and St. George, about who owns what. In the meantime, the city starts going downhill, and it's still not sorted out yet. They're really absentee owners. The grandchildren and children see it as a plaything, so they can go to their cocktail parties in London and say, "Oh, we own Freeport. We own the city of Freeport." But they're real live Bahamians who live there, and they have a living there, and they have a stake in the city. In any event, the city reverts to the Bahamas government in 30 years' time, 2054. So persons like your cameraman, like Utah, like you even, 30 years, you're still going to be around here. And the Bahamas is going to still be around here. And the question is, whether we succeed with what we're doing now or 30 years from now, we have to decide what this city is going to be for us, and what is the revenue base going to be for us. So the issue has to be joined now, and that's what's happening. And there's no back and forth over this. So Pinling, after the 1969 speech, went to London. They amended the Constitution. That's when the term Prime Minister first came into our lexicon. They amended the Constitution because before that he was Premier. He became Prime Minister in 1969. And after 1969, they put a provision in the 1969 Constitution which made it clear that immigration and national security belonged to the Bahamas government and not the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Because before that, they had devolved to the Grand Bahama Port Authority immigration powers, and also they had their own supernumerary police force. All of that changed after 1969. Now, that was done with the leave of the British, who are our sovereign overlords. Well, we have no sovereign overlord now. It's us. This is a contract, and the government of the Bahamas has the sovereign right to change, by law, these things. The remedy for the shareholders, if they want to argue about it, is in damages. The Prime Minister is using the art of gentle persuasion to say, hey, time to move on. There was a story told about a former Prime Minister, Hewitt Ingram, who one of the fellows was refusing to resign from the public corporation after there was a change of government and he became Prime Minister. And they said he was passing and saw the fellow in the street, so he stopped his car, rolled down the window and said, hey, I need that thing from you. So that's what Brave Davis is saying to the Grand Bahama Port Authority. We need that thing. Not now, not later, but now. Quicker the better.
Fox Hill.
Yes, the great Fox Hill.
The great Fox Hill.
Yeah.
So sad that you had to send that note, that voice note, that WhatsApp message out.
Yeah.
What's your message to those who are wreaking havoc there?
Well, it's really unfortunate that these are the times we live in. And it was not meant to cause panic, but for people to exercise a degree of caution, because we've had a number of attacks on in the public spaces in Fox Hill. The community is by and large quite a peaceful community, and most people basically go about their daily lives. But the facts are what they are. I mean, we looked at the pictures. So the message went out one night. The next day, some man is killed in the Johnson Road area. When we looked at these horrific pictures, at someone who, from just looking at his profile, could not have been involved in any kind of nefarious activities. And you ask yourself, what drives people to do something so cruel? I don't know. And ultimately, we think the social solution is that you have to mentor people through the school system, because there's obviously some kind of desensitization that's taken place where people have no regard for human life or feelings for human beings, other human beings. So we've just got our work cut out for us. But in the meantime, dealing with the present, you have to, if you find information that you get, you have to let people know what the facts are.
You seem to know, or you should know, your constituents. Do you know some of these bad people?
I can't say that I know any bad people, but obviously there are people who are engaged in nefarious activities. I know of reputations, but my relationships with people have all been respectful, and I've never run into any issues of that kind. But, it's clear that there's an issue. And what I think people in Fox Hill are really concerned about is that the constituency, the village, gets the reputation of being associated with this, and they don't like that. When George Mackey, who was my predecessor, was handing off to me, he said that when he was a student at Government High School, they used to say that Fox Hill was behind God's back. And he said, so I made it my business when I became Member of Parliament to try and change that image. And he said, now I'm handing off to you, and that's what your job is, to make sure that that image does not stick on Fox Hill. Yeah.
What do you say to these bad actors to get that feeling of village again?
Well, the feeling of the village is there. I say to people, Fox Hill is, I think, the only constituency. Well, Gambia is not a constituency, but in Gambia Village, you can walk to school. But Fox Hill is a place where you can, from the time you enter school, preschool, primary school, junior high, senior high, you can walk to school. So you've got Sandlands Primary School, which has got a preschool in it. You've got L.W. Young, which is a junior high, and Dawes Johnson, which is a senior high. And all of those are within walking distance of where you live. So that tells you that you have a village right there and a community which is self-contained. And then you have 33 churches there, but let's count the main ones. You have an Anglican church, St. Anne's. You have the Catholic Church, St. Anselm's. You have 2 Methodist churches, Coke churches. You have 4 Baptist churches, or 5 if you count Rehoboth. And then you've got 2 churches of God and 1 Church of God of Prophecy. And they basically are that community. So if you want to get a message out in Fox Hill, just make sure it gets to the pastors before 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and you've got it. And that's still a village. So it's been my job as the Member of Parliament to try and keep that going. And that's one of the reasons why we do the Fox Hill Festival every year, which starts with Emancipation Day and ends with Fox Hill Day. And the Prime Minister's, since we've been in office, since Christie was in office, since he's leader of the opposition, in fact, has been coming up to Fox Hill for Fox Hill Day. And the Prime Minister now continues that tradition because we believe that Fox Hill has an importance which is beyond what they do themselves. It's the last kind of redoubt for African culture in our country, because it was a settlement of freed African people when they landed here in New Providence.
One more topic. The Bahamas' recognition of Palestine as a state, and today's news that Biden might consider withholding delivery of offensive weapons to Netanyahu's Israel. Your take?
Well, we've always acted in our foreign policy as far as we can with other CARICOM countries. So
Did the last?
Yes, Trinidad and Tobago and ourselves were the last kind of holdouts on this issue. And that's largely because we have a really conservative population here in the Bahamas. And even though the government intellectually was at that point some time ago, you try not to move too much ahead of where people are. I think after seeing what is happening on their newscasts every evening over there and the disproportionate response of the one side to the other side, I think people's attitudes have shifted and people have said, hey, this is just too much. And what does a small country do? Well, obviously, we don't have the economic might, we don't have the political power, we don't have the military power, but we can send a signal for where we stand. We stand on a certain set of principles. And one is you don't slaughter people. You don't, you just don't do it. I mean, obviously you have to defend yourself, but even in war, there are rules as to how you conduct yourself. And it just doesn't come off as correct. Before making the announcement, we spoke to our major allies. We spoke to the Americans, spoke to the British, and to Brazil. And we advised them of the steps we were about to take. And there's been no pushback on it. There are 140 countries, so we're now 141 at the UN that recognizes Palestine as a state. And we think that given the support for ourselves in our fight for self-determination, where UN countries supported us, we think it's appropriate to do so. The same way we launched into the anti-apartheid movement. I was very instrumental in that, so it's a natural thing, progression, to be fighting for the rights of people to determine their own government in a defined territory. And the UN passed a resolution in 1967 which lays out the plan for that, and that's where we are. As for the decision on the weapons, of course, that's entirely the sovereign decision of the United States, but I think anything which helps de-escalate, which is the phrase that the CARICOM foreign ministers and prime ministers have used, anything that de-escalates the violence, we think obviously is a good thing.
Any other news from your ministry you'd like to share with ZNS News?
We are charged, as you know, principally with the fight on climate change. And so the Bahamas is about to join an effort with the two South Pacific countries in Azerbaijan in a couple of days. So that's an accord which will be signed by the government in Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan. Boy, I always get that word mixed up, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, okay.
And it so we'll be over there for a couple of days and sign this accord with them in Baku, and we hope that this sets the stage for what we're going to be doing at COP29, which will be in Baku in the wintertime.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. Thank you.
Great, you're welcome.
We got enough news. The only problem is our system only holds 6 for 7 days. I want to keep it.
Yeah, I'll keep
Thank you. What the only thing I wanted was for a 2-shot. Can we get a 2-shot?